I was driving from Brooklyn to Vermont, heading to my friend John's cabin for a weekend of snowboarding. At the time, I had two cars, a 2013 BMW and a 2006 Ford pickup truck. That night, I was driving the truck. I had my snowboard gear thrown in the truck bed. I was about 45 minutes from the cabin. It was around 1 a.m., pitch black outside, and it was snowing. There were no other cars on the road at that hour. I had just picked the truck up from the mechanic a few weeks before. It always gave me trouble, and that night was no different. At the worst possible time, on the darkest, quietest road, my engine started to overheat. The needle shot into the red zone. I slowed down and pulled over to let it cool off. Then I got back on the road, driving slowly, but the engine overheated again almost right away. I had to pull over and shut the truck off completely. I got out and popped the hood to check things out, but it was too dark and snowy to see what was wrong. I tried calling my friend John, but there was no cell service out there at all. I felt completely stuck. I got back in the truck and turned it on just to stay warm, since it didn't seem to overheat while just sitting there idling. I tried driving again, but the same thing happened, so I waited. About 10 minutes later, I finally saw a car coming down the road. I turned on my hazard lights and waved my arms. The car pulled over. It was a small Toyota. The driver rolled down his window, and I thanked him for stopping. I asked if I could borrow his phone. He asked what happened, and I explained my truck was overheating and I couldn't drive it. Then, he asked if I was all alone out there. I paused for a second before saying yes. He handed me his phone. He must have lived nearby because he actually had signal. I called John and asked what I should do. He told me to call a specific tow company and said he'd come pick me up. I gave him my location, and he said he was heading out right away. Then I called the tow company he mentioned and asked for help. The whole time I was on the phone, the man in the car just watched me. I tried not to look back at him too much. When I finished, I thanked him and handed the phone back. He said, "You're welcome," rolled up his window without another word, and drove off into the dark. I watched his taillights disappear over the hill. Then, I was alone again. I got back in my truck to stay warm. For a second, I turned off my headlights just to see how dark it really was outside. I'm not exaggerating when I say I couldn't see an inch in front of me. It was pure black. I sat there waiting, playing games on my phone since I had no internet out there anyway. About 20 minutes passed. Then there was a loud bang on my passenger window. I jumped out of my skin. I looked over, but could barely make out a shape in the dark. The headlights didn't reach that far to the side. I heard a man's voice begging for help, saying he was freezing and needed me to open the door. I heard him trying the handle himself, but it was locked. I pointed my flashlight at the window, but it barely helped. All I could make out was someone wearing a big black coat with the hood pulled up. I called out, "What's wrong?" He said he was lost and stranded and needed to get out of the cold. Something about it didn't feel right. I sat there trying to figure out what to ask him to prove he wasn't dangerous, but before I could say anything, he started yanking harder on the door handle. Then, he began pounding on the glass, screaming for help even louder. In that moment, I decided to trust my gut. I threw the truck in drive. He realized what I was doing and started slamming on the window even harder, like he was trying to break it. I pulled out onto the road and got the truck up to 30 miles an hour, even though I knew I was probably wrecking the overheating engine. Then, something happened that made my heart stop. As I came over a hill, I saw taillights parked on the side of the road ahead. As I got closer, I realized it was the same Toyota from earlier. I slowed down and rolled my window down to check if the man was inside, but the car looked empty. I glanced behind it, and my taillights lit up a set of footprints in the snow. That meant the man who had been pounding on my window really was him. He had been trying to trick me into unlocking my door. I kept driving, knowing I was destroying the engine, but I didn't care anymore. A few minutes later, I saw headlights coming from the other direction. I almost cheered when I realized it was the tow truck. I flashed my lights, and he pulled over. I told him everything that had just happened. He joked that he showed up right on time. Then, he asked if the man had a weapon on him. I told him I couldn't tell in the dark. He said, "Well, then let's move fast." It took him about 15 minutes to hook up my truck. During that whole time, the Toyota never passed us again. Maybe he'd turned around and gone the other way for a reason. I used the tow truck driver's phone to call John one more time and told him to just meet us at the repair shop instead. To wrap it up, John and I still went snowboarding that weekend. The shop found out my water pump was broken, which explained the overheating. I sold that truck a few weeks later. Looking back, I'm really glad I never unlocked that door or rolled down my window for that man. Out there, alone, in the pitch black, I could have been killed, and no one would have ever known what happened to me. 5. Robert Mason had spent nearly 20 years driving long-haul trucks across America. He had crossed deserts, mountains, forests, and endless highways. Over the years, he had heard every ghost story imaginable from other truckers at roadside diners. Most involved haunted motels, strange lights in the sky, or mysterious figures standing beside lonely roads. Robert never believed any of them. To him, every story had a logical explanation. That belief changed on a cold October night in 1976. He was driving east along Highway 50 in Nevada, a road so isolated that it was known as the loneliest road in America. The nearest town was miles away, and there were long stretches where a driver could travel for an hour without seeing another vehicle. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds. The darkness felt endless. The only sounds were the steady hum of the engine and the occasional crackle from the CB radio. Around 11:30 p.m., Robert noticed something ahead. At first, he thought it was a road sign. Then he realized it was a person. A woman stood motionless on the shoulder of the highway. She appeared to be in her early 20s and wore a white dress that looked completely out of place in the cold desert night. As Robert approached, he slowed his truck. The woman wasn't waving for help. She simply stood there. Waiting, Robert hesitated. Every safety instinct told him to keep driving. But leaving a stranded woman alone in the middle of nowhere didn't feel right. He pulled over. The woman walked toward the truck without speaking. When she climbed inside, Robert noticed something strange. Her clothes were perfectly clean. No dust, no dirt, no signs that she had been standing beside a highway. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Need a ride?" "Please." Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Where are you headed?" She gave him an address in a small town nearly 30 miles away. Robert started driving. For several minutes, neither of them spoke. The woman stared straight ahead. The silence became uncomfortable. Eventually, Robert tried making conversation. "You from around here?" "A long time ago." The answer seemed odd, but Robert assumed she meant she had moved away. The heater inside the cab was running, yet the temperature felt strangely cold. Robert rubbed his hands together. He glanced toward the passenger seat. The woman sat perfectly still, not blinking, not moving, just staring into the darkness beyond the windshield. A feeling of unease began creeping into Robert's mind. Something wasn't right. About 10 miles later, he reached for his coffee cup. His eyes left the road for only a second. When he looked back toward the passenger seat, it was empty. Robert slammed the brakes. The truck skidded to a stop. His heart pounded violently. He jumped out and searched the roadside. No footprints, no sign of anyone. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction. The woman had simply vanished. Robert searched for nearly 20 minutes. Then he climbed back into the truck and locked the doors. For the rest of the drive, he couldn't stop checking his mirrors. The next morning he arrived at the address the woman had given him. He felt ridiculous. Yet he needed answers. The house belonged to an elderly couple. When they answered the door, Robert explained what had happened. At first, they listened politely. Then he described the woman. The old man's face turned pale. The elderly woman covered her mouth. Without speaking, they invited him inside. The couple showed Robert a photograph. His blood ran cold. The woman in the picture was the same passenger he had picked up. Same face, same white dress, same expression. "That's impossible," Robert whispered. The elderly woman began crying. "Our daughter Emily died in a car accident on Highway 50 11 years ago." Robert stared at the photograph. His mind struggled to process the information. The old man sighed. "You're not the first person to come here." Robert felt a chill run through his body. "What do you mean?" The man explained that several travelers had arrived at their house over the years. Each described meeting Emily on the highway. Each claimed to have given her a ride. Each said she disappeared before reaching town. Most refused to discuss the experience afterward. Some never returned to that road again. Robert left the house shaken. For months, he tried convincing himself there was a reasonable explanation. Perhaps he had imagined the encounter. Maybe exhaustion had caused a hallucination. Yet one detail troubled him. When he had searched the truck later that day, he found something lying on the passenger seat. A small silver hairpin. The elderly couple identified it immediately. It had belonged to Emily. Robert kept the hairpin for years. He never spoke publicly about the incident, but he never forgot it. And whenever he drove Highway 50 at night, he made sure never to stop for anyone standing alone beside the road. Because deep down, he feared he might see her again, waiting in the darkness. This happened in the late summer of 2011. I was almost 19 and hanging out with my best friend, who was a couple years younger than me. We lived in a really rural part of southwestern Virginia, about 15 minutes from Mount Airy, North Carolina. Around there, pretty much everything shuts down by 10 p.m., so you have to make your own fun. That was never really a problem for us, though. That night started off normal. We went to the mall, then drove around looking for girls, the usual stuff teenage guys do. When that didn't work out, we went bowling until they closed. A little before midnight, we walked around Main Street, wandering through the back alleys and acting tough, even though there's really not much crime out there. After walking around for a while, we got hungry and grabbed food at the Waffle House, since that was basically the only place open that late. We stopped by Walmart too, but we still weren't ready to go home, so we decided to drive some of the backcountry roads. That was nothing new for us. Late night drives were basically our thing, but this particular stretch of road I had maybe driven once before, and only during the day. It wasn't far from either of our houses, we just never had a reason to go down it. The road starts out paved, but within a mile it crosses back into Virginia and turns to dirt, like a lot of roads out there. The county doesn't maintain that road much since it's out of the way, and it washes out a lot when it rains. Because of that, you have to drive really slow. Since we didn't know the road well, we were basically crawling along. We were on edge already, but it still felt like any other back road. At this hour, the roads out there are basically empty, and with only a few houses along that stretch, we figured we wouldn't run into anyone else. The road runs through the woods, at the base of a small mountain, so at night it's easy to miss the houses entirely. We probably would have missed them all if we hadn't noticed a light burning out of the corner of our eyes. We both looked over and saw a man standing under his porch light. We couldn't make out his face or any details, but we could tell he was watching us. He stood completely still, except his head slowly turned to follow our car as we passed. That gave us both a really bad feeling. We tried to brush it off, figuring he'd just stepped outside for a cigarette, but something about how still and quiet he was really unsettled us. Nothing actually happened because of him. But it set the tone for what came next. We picked up speed, getting more nervous the more we talked about it. After a few minutes, the dirt road ended, and we were back on pavement, a road I knew much better. We turned right, and both felt relieved, glad to leave the thought of that man behind us. That road runs along a small mountain ridge, and it has a nice view of the town below. After a couple miles, we reached the end of it and turned right again to head back toward my house. This next road was more wooded, but I knew it even better since I'd driven it thousands of times. As we made our way toward the main highway, we saw something up ahead in our headlights. Deer are common out there, so we figured that's all it was and slowed down. But it looked whiter than a deer's brown fur. We figured maybe it was an albino deer, since we'd seen those before too. As we got closer though, we realized it wasn't an animal at all. It was a person, hunched over, walking with their back to us, in the wrong lane, against traffic. My friend asked out loud what they were doing walking around at that hour. As we got closer, we could finally make out an older woman with long, messy gray hair, wearing a white t-shirt and white pants. She kept her back to us until we were about 50 feet away. Then, she turned around, and we got our first look at her face. I don't want to say she looked like she was on drugs, but that's the impression she gave. Deep, sunken eyes with dark circles under them, greasy hair, and skin that looked much older than it probably was. I couldn't guess her exact age, maybe mid-40s to late 50s, but her face wasn't even the worst part. She threw her hands in the air and started waving them wildly, running straight toward our car. That's when we saw what looked like dried blood all over the front of her shirt and pants. She was also holding what looked like a large knife. We had no idea what she wanted, but any thought of acting tough vanished instantly. We floored it and didn't slow down until we hit the highway. We were both so shaken that what should have been a 5-minute drive home turned into a 35-minute detour, just because we were terrified she could somehow follow us. In a small community like ours, you pretty much know everyone, but neither of us had ever seen this woman before, and we never saw her again after that night. We kept an eye on the local news for weeks, expecting to hear something about a bloody woman being found or picked up, but nothing ever came up. To this day, I can't explain what she was doing out on that back road at almost 4 in the morning, in that condition, covered in blood, holding a knife, with every risk of running into a person or animal out there. Fast forward to now, I actually live with my wife on that same peaceful ridge road, right between the two roads where this all happened. I drive the second road almost every day, and I've never seen any sign of that woman again. But earlier this year, there was a big drug bust and dog-fighting ring broken up down the road from where that watching man used to stand. I don't know if it was the same house or if those people even lived there back then. But I've often wondered if that was the same place and if that man was standing guard that night. As for the woman, I just hope I never run into her again. I was driving home from work late one night. I was taking my usual route. I got off work around midnight, so it was about 12:15 at this point. My town is quiet and boring. There are woods everywhere, and not many people or houses. I was on a road close to my house. There was a cornfield on one side and woods on the other. It was the middle of summer, about 75 degrees, so I had my convertible top down. I was driving about 50 miles an hour when I heard a loud scream. It was a woman screaming, like she was in real pain. I couldn't tell which side of the road it came from. I hit the brakes and stopped to listen. Then I heard her cry for help again. It came from the woods on my left. I got out of my car and grabbed a baton from the back seat. I walked toward the woods and called out, "Who's out there?" The woman called back right away, "Please help me." I started running into the woods, pushing branches and bushes out of my way. I yelled at her to keep screaming so I could find her. Every 10 seconds or so, she'd scream for help, and I'd run toward the sound. But after a while, I noticed something strange. No matter how far I ran, her voice never got closer. It never got louder either. It always stayed the same distance away, even though I was running straight at it. I yelled out, "Tell me where you are." About 5 seconds later, she screamed for help again. I stopped moving. Something felt very wrong. I started to think I was being led into a trap. I turned around and ran back the way I came. I kept running until I saw my car's headlights flashing through the trees. The whole way back, I could still hear her screaming. It was still the same distance away, no matter how close I got to my car. It was like she was following me. Was I being hunted? I got in my car and drove away as fast as I could. I was completely freaked out. I called 911 to report what happened, in case they wanted to check it out. But I wasn't going back there myself. I told a few friends and family about it, and then I tried to move on with my life. But a week later, I saw something on the news that made me feel sick. They found the body of a woman, somewhere in her 30s, in the woods. A man walking his dog found her. Strangely, there were no signs that she had been attacked. The spot where they found her was in the same general area where I had heard the screaming. That patch of woods is huge, so it could be a coincidence. But it still felt like way too big a coincidence to ignore. Got my first girlfriend when I was 17. I lived with my mom at the time, since my parents split up when I was 11. One day I asked her out on a date, and she said yes. We both had jobs. I worked at a local grocery store, and she worked at a Starbucks. We both worked day shifts, and we were seniors in high school. I picked that particular Friday because we barely had any homework that week. After work, I picked her up from her house, and we went to a small restaurant about 10 minutes from my place. It was really all I could afford back then. We ate dinner, then went back to her house to hang out for a while. By then, it was already dark outside. She said our date felt too short, and I told her I couldn't afford to take her anywhere else that cost money. So we agreed to just go for a night drive instead. We drove around town for a bit, then headed out to some empty roads through the woods. Eventually the pavement ended, and we were on a dirt road. I really had to pee, and it turned out she did too. We pulled over and stepped out of the car. As soon as we got out, we noticed an awful smell, one I really can't describe. I figured maybe someone else had pulled over to use the bathroom too. My girlfriend actually gagged from how bad it was. I told her we'd just go quickly and get back in the car to head back to town. There was a small flat spot nearby that seemed like the best place to go. We both did our business and started heading back toward the car. On the way, we heard a noise off to our left, like a twig snapping. I figured it was probably just an animal, so we hurried back to the car. But right before I could open my door, I heard a scream, like someone in fear or pain, coming from the exact spot where we'd just been. I told my girlfriend to get in the car while I went to check it out. She begged me not to go, but I did anyway, mostly to make her feel safer. I locked the doors before I left. I walked toward where the sound came from and heard the scream again. Now that I was closer, I suddenly lost all my nerve. It seemed to be coming from the same direction as that twig snapping sound earlier. Instead of walking straight at it, I pulled out my phone, turned on the flash, and snapped a photo. When the flash went off, I saw a man standing there. He wore a white shirt with black stripes, and there was some blue tarp laid out in front of him. He was just standing completely still. I didn't wait around to think about it. I ran straight back to the car, unlocked it, jumped in, and floored it out of there. My girlfriend kept asking what happened. She could tell I was scared. I told her I'd explain later. We drove to a busier part of town, then headed back to her house. Once we got inside her room, I finally told her what I saw. The man standing with the blue tarp in front of him. I showed her the photo, and she got just as freaked out as I was. She let me stay the night since neither of us had work or school the next day. And honestly, neither of us wanted to be alone after that. That night is still the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. We're not together anymore. I'm 23 now, and she's 22, but we're still close friends to this day. In the autumn of 1988, 3 college students were driving home after a football game in rural Missouri. Their names were Daniel, Mark, and Kevin. The game had ended late. By midnight, they were traveling along a remote highway surrounded by dense forest. The road crossed an old bridge known locally as Black River Bridge. Residents avoided the bridge after dark. Stories about it had circulated for decades. According to local legend, a man had died there during a terrible crash years earlier. Drivers claimed to see a dark figure standing near the bridge late at night. Most dismissed the stories as superstition. Daniel certainly did. He laughed when Kevin mentioned the legend. "Ghost stories are for kids," Daniel said. Mark agreed. The 3 continued driving. Rain began falling. Visibility worsened. The highway became almost completely deserted. As they approached the bridge, Kevin suddenly sat forward. "Did you see that?" "See what?" Daniel asked. "Someone standing by the road." Daniel slowed slightly. The headlights swept across the bridge entrance. For a brief moment, they illuminated a figure, a tall man dressed entirely in black, standing motionless, watching them. The students exchanged nervous glances. Daniel accelerated. Within seconds, the figure disappeared behind them. "Probably a hitchhiker," Mark said. Nobody sounded convinced. A few miles later, they reached a gas station. The station was old and nearly empty. Only one elderly attendant worked inside. While Daniel filled the car with fuel, Kevin mentioned seeing someone near Black River Bridge. The attendant froze. His expression changed immediately. What did he look like? Tall, wearing black. The man's face turned pale. Without another word, he walked outside. "Did he move?" "No." The attendant shook his head. "You boys should head home." Daniel laughed. "You're not actually saying it was a ghost." The attendant didn't smile. Instead, he told them a story. 20 years earlier, a local man had died on the bridge during a storm. Witnesses claimed he had been thrown from his vehicle into the river below. His body was never recovered. Soon afterward, drivers began reporting sightings. Always the same description: tall, dark clothing, standing near the bridge, watching. Some drivers claimed the figure appeared behind them moments later. Others reported hearing knocks on their windows while driving. A few allegedly crashed after encountering him. Daniel thanked the attendant, but dismissed the story. The students continued their journey. Around 1 o'clock, and they found themselves once again approaching Black River Bridge. A detour forced them onto the same road. Rain pounded the windshield. Lightning flashed overhead. The atmosphere felt oppressive. As the bridge came into view, Kevin suddenly screamed. The figure stood in the middle of the road. Daniel slammed the brakes. The car skidded dangerously. For a split second, the headlights illuminated the man's face. His eyes appeared completely black. Then, heaved, not moved, vanished. The road ahead was empty. Daniel's hands trembled. Nobody spoke. They crossed the bridge quickly. Then a loud bang echoed from the rear of the vehicle. Something had struck the trunk. Mark looked through the back window. His face turned white. "Drive." "What? Drive?" Daniel accelerated. Mark continued staring behind them. "What do you see?" "He was there." "Who?" "The man." Daniel felt panic rising. "Where?" "On the trunk." Lightning flashed again. For a brief moment, Kevin looked through the rear window. A dark silhouette clung to the back of the moving car. Then, another flash illuminated nothing. The figure was gone. The students reached town safely. None of them slept that night. The following morning, they inspected the car. Across the trunk were several long scratches. Not normal scratches, They looked like deep claw marks cut into the metal. Years later, all three men continued telling the same story. Their descriptions never changed. Investigators could never explain the damage to the vehicle. Locals still report sightings near Black River Bridge. Some claim to see a dark figure standing alone during storms. Others hear footsteps on the bridge despite nobody being present. Whether the legend is true remains unknown. But travelers who cross Black River Bridge after midnight often avoid looking in their rear-view mirrors because they fear seeing a silent passenger following them home.